Hey, welcome to the Happy Money Journey podcast, or you might be watching us on video. I'm Phoebe Blamey, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here and be spending some time with you today. Today, I'm interviewing Jules Brooke. We've done this over two parts just to keep of about 20 minutes, just to keep it consistent for you. So have a listen. The first part is all about how Jules created connection during COVID and started the sTheBoss group, which is a brilliant group and a brilliant source of inspiration for me and so many other women our age who have started their own business, are female founders, or even just have a side hustle and need other business women to connect with and learn from. It's been a great experience, and I thought Jules had a lot to share with us on this. The next part is all about how Jules is starting the Women of Influence and all the things that you can get out of that and learn from one of the greatest PR gurus of our time, also being Jules. So enjoy. So this week, I'm really excited to welcome Jules Brooke, who, if you don't know Jules, is the queen of females over 40 networking. She started the sTheBoss group during COVID with lunch, which I jumped on and got to know the most amazing women. And Jules is just here to talk to us about her sTheBoss experience and what brought her there and all the things. Her Handle Your Own PR business, which I've got great things out of. And, of course, her Women of Influence course, which is just extraordinary. Oh. So all the extraordinary work you're doing for women, Jules.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Phoebe, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so glad you are. So talk to me about sTheBoss. What gave you the idea to start this and how did it start?
Okay, you have to go back really to 2019. So I saw an ad from a guy that I'd never met on LinkedIn saying I'm looking for people to interview. Anything around technology, business and innovation. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I'm running Handle Your Own PR. And I was like, me. I mean, firstly, I'm teaching people to take every opportunity. But also, it just seemed like it would be a great opportunity to explain what I'm doing. So I turned up, met this fabulous guy, Aaron, who runs now Ticker TV. I have to say, my expectations at the time were incredibly low. I thought it would probably be in his bedroom or something. So basically, I had booked in to say to him, can I come and talk to you about Handle Your Own PR? And then we can set up a time for an interview. And I walked in, he just put the microphone on me and said, we're doing it now.
Oh, wow.
And I wasn't, I thought I wasn't dressed for it. I wasn't anything. But I thought, oh, well, I always like to go with the flow. And so I did an interview with him. At the end of it, he said, oh, my God, that was so much fun. Can we do another one? And I said, sure. So we did this 1 minute one. And then he said, would you consider co-hosting the lunches with me, the Ticker TV show lunches? And I was like, oh, my God, I've been found. It was fantastic. And then as we got talking, he was saying, look, I need more content. And I said to him, well, can I have a show about women in business? Because there's just nothing on television that I ever see about them. And he said, sure. So that's really what started it off. I called the show sTheBoss, by the way. From there, as I was researching and talking to incredible women, there was some research that was done in Queensland about female founders. And the stats that came out of that kind of blew me away. And that has set me on a journey really for the last 4 years. So the first thing that I heard was that, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers will know, that 1% of VC funding was going to women. Now, it went up to 3% pre-COVID, and it's down at 0.7% this year. So it's just rubbish. I'm allowed to swear.
If you're allowed to actually really swear.
Totally shit. So I thought, no, that's hopeless. So that was the first thing. Then I discovered that most women who run businesses are over 45. And yet I feel like all you ever see is groups for business mums, which I was a big part of when I had little kids, and for startups, which all the language and everything assumes that you're 25. So I thought I could do something with this. So that was the beginning of it. Then we went into lockdown. And as you said, I started doing online lunches for women in business because I just thought we all needed to be connected. A lot of women were going, my career's over. What am I going to do? A lot of people had businesses that were very reliant on bricks and mortar. So I thought, well, I'll start these casual online lunches. At the end of the first one, we all had such a good time. I said to them, well, I'll do another one next month. And they went, we can't wait. So I said, okay, well, we'll do it weekly and we'll see how that goes. And I did it for 2 years weekly and now still do it fortnightly. So that was the start of sTheBoss. So from there, I started the podcast.
Yes.
So he was saying to me, look, I don't know really that our viewers are that interested in old women talking about business. And I said, I think there's a huge market for it. So he said, well, if you love interviewing them so much, why don't you start a podcast? And my partner at the time, Dave, is an audiobook producer. So he said, I'll produce them. And I went, great. And I think we both thought that we'd do 12. And now I've done 250. So at about 50, he opted out of doing all the production. And my son, Jake, who's amazing, offered to do it. And then about a couple of months later, the TV show ended. And I remember I'd started a Facebook group called She's the Boss. And I went into the group and I said to everyone, listen, I'm not going to be able to do the TV show anymore. And they went, no, you've got to do it. And this is the universe for you. So what happened next was that a wonderful woman called Sam Elam, who runs Media Maneuvers, which is a big media training company, rings me on the same day to say, I've just dismantled a whole TV studio's worth of equipment. Would you like it? And my son said, I know how to use all that equipment. I can produce your TV show. So we decided we'd keep going. And during the lockdown, I did 48 interviews with incredible women from Australia. I had one woman in Reykjavik. I had another woman in Turks and Caicos, a few women in New York, LA, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, etc., etc. And I just realized that I loved it. And I guess from there, I realized that what I was really passionate about was supporting women over 40 in business. I also wanted to encourage them to become more visible, because another of the interviews I did was with a wonderful woman, Lady Clegg, who was married to the ex-Deputy Prime Minister of England.
Right.
I didn't know any of this at the time. And she had done a whole lot of research that said girls 11 to 16 cannot see role models of women doing the sorts of things that they would like to do when they're older. And we're not saying that there aren't some women out there. There are unicorns that we hear about all the time. But what about the normal women? What makes them think that they would be able to do it? They need to see women who are like them.
Yep.
So that was sort of another thing that really sort of got me going. And then from there, I've heard some pretty awful stats about all sorts of things. And it just makes you realize that all these things are happening around us that we don't know in terms of unconscious bias. So the next one was women only appear in 1% of history books as leaders. And I just thought, wow, never questioned that, never even thought anything of it. But they're right. You only hear you've heard a few, Marie Curie and Joan of Arc and a few people like that. But again, where are the inspirations for the younger women and younger girls? So that's really what's kind of taken me on
I've
this
come
path.
across that before as well. The woman that wrote Invisible Women, whose name I will
come back to.
I will put in the show
Miriam
notes.
Gonzalez Duarte.
All right. I'll put in the show notes, but she actually led a campaign to get statues of female leaders in Britain.
Brilliant.
Like this amazing campaign. And I heard her interviewed on Julia Gillard's podcast, which is excellent if you haven't listened to it. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing that if we can't see it, it's really hard to be it.
Yeah.
And that was the whole idea of the affirmative action movement as well, like back when we were probably at school still. But that was the whole premise of affirmative action, was to get us into positions so that we could be seen, so that then we could have a following.
Because if you see that someone else has done it, you know that it's achievable.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're trying to forge pathways, like a lot of women in STEM are still trying to do, women in technology, women in science, they're such a small minority. I think the numbers are like under 30%, it's 25% or something, that it's really, really hard for them to get ahead, and for young girls to go, I want to be in that industry, because they're not seeing enough women doing it.
Yeah.
And there's Gina Davis, the actress from Accidental Tourist and Beetlejuice.
Yes.
I don't know whether everyone realizes, but she started the Institute of Media Diversity in the 80s in America, and it's the biggest researcher of women in entertainment around the world. This was another stat I read. So she had something that came out in the media at the end of 2020 that said that women over 50 appear in less than 4% of media globally. Now, I think that's probably across entertainment, and I would also say that's probably changing a little bit. But the percentages, I mean, it might have gone from 4 to 10, but otherwise they're all grandmothers. They're not, gung-ho businesswomen, and that's, I guess, what we want to see as well.
I really want to see a lot more of that. Yeah. So talk to me about venture capital funding and why you think those stats have moved from 1% to 3% to less than 1% at 0.7.
Look, I don't really know. Look, there's another stat I heard from the wonderful Irene Zhang, who runs Lift Women. And Irene has done a whole lot of research into entrepreneurial women.
Yep.
And 68% of investors say they prefer to hear from a male voice which of course might be okay for me. But for most women, that's not really going to work.
That's funny because that came up in my
It's a horrible stat.
Yeah, it's a horrible stat. It came up in my I've just finished my MBA, as you know.
Congratulations. High distinction.
High distinction. And it came up in my MBA as well. It's actually not necessarily a male voice. It's a male way of doing things.
Which is very left brain, very logical, very numbers driven.
Yes.
Not story driven, which I think is what SheEO, which is now called Correlus, have done, is changed that model on its head and got women to tell the stories of what they're trying to do and achieve. And then if they like the story, they get them in to go and have a look at the numbers, which makes
much more sense,
doesn't it? But I think one of the biggest problems is that investment up until recently has really been driven by men, and it's men who are dominant in that industry. And what's happening now is a whole lot of high net worth women are setting up investment companies and only targeting and wanting to invest in women, which makes sense because, to be honest, women-led businesses give a much, much better ROI. Really, it's something like, I haven't looked at the numbers for a while, but it's something like, I don't know, 10% more than men when it comes to a woman-led business, and they give back to their communities, which is phenomenal. Which is what we want,
because we want to change the world,
and we want it to be kinder,
and we want it to be much kinder, and that's beautiful. I love that stat.
Yeah.
Talk to me now about women of influence.
Okay, so what happened was one of the women in our group, Nikki Cully, runs a platform that you know of as well called Wisdome. And Wisdome is an e-learning platform that's been set up because she'd been on some of the big name ones and found that they needed loads of plugins and started becoming really expensive. So she wanted to do an all-in-one package. And I think you were speaking there as well, or were you just there?
No, I wasn't.
We were at an event anyway. We were at an event and Sam Winch was there talking. Sam Winch is the guru of putting together courses. And she said, if you were to do a course, what would you want to do? Now, I had gone to this thing because I was speaking at it. And, and this has happened to me a lot, where I feel like I'm such a smart ass. I'm like, I know everything. I'm not going to learn anything from this. And Sam said, what would you do for a course? And I thought, other than handle your own PR, and we can talk about that later. But so I have a course. I was like, I don't need another course. And I suddenly went, what about the 4 steps to becoming a woman of influence? And all the women in the group, and there were, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 there, said, oh my God, we love it. And I thought, I'm onto something. So I created the course. It started off as 4 pillars. It is now 7 pillars. Might go to 8. I'm considering adding books in there as well. But the pillars are, and I have to look here because I wrote them down, LinkedIn, because I think most people don't realize that not only can you get to very senior people on LinkedIn, but on LinkedIn, only 3% of people post. And there's 1 billion people on there. So if you post and you post regularly, you'll really get cut through quite fast. And I've managed to organically grow mine from 1,500 to 9,500 followers in 3 years from just posting. So that's one thing that I think really positions you as a leader. PR goes without saying. I believe that PR is probably the most effective way to build your brand and get awareness of what you're doing and build trust very fast, because you get that third-party endorsement of another media outlet. Yeah. Networking, clearly She's the Boss, as it's developed, is really online events and in-person events. It's all about networking. It's that old age saying that goes, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think there's a lot of women that need to build their networks. Which brings me to my next one, which is podcasting. Now, people think about podcasting, as you're doing now, as it's a great way to get your voice out there. But I actually think I don't really care how many people listen to my podcast. It allows me to reach out to very senior people and say, can I interview you, rather than can I meet you for a coffee, or will you do something for me? So firstly, that has grown my networks enormously. Secondly, you get to talk with someone for half an hour, which definitely builds some kind of rapport there. Yep. And you get a chance for them to see what you're like and vice versa. It gives you something to post about every week, or however frequently you are. So it's pushing your name out there. Yep. And a whole lot of other reasons. Anyway, so that led me to podcasting. Speaking goes without saying. Women need to be on the stage. I recently, as part of the course, was researching what was happening with women on the stage and found out that 30% of events with speakers use women, which horrified me. I mean, I'm like, oh my God, I know about 1,000 women that want to speak on stages.
And mate, you haven't seen Nathan Buckley give his business advice yet.
No, I haven't. And I possibly won't.
I suggest you possibly won't. No offense to Nathan Buckley, sure, he was a great footballer and all that sort of stuff. But we, in our banking and finance world, we get sports commentators around
all the time,
all
around
the
business,
time,
rather
business,
than bringing
and
in.
it's not the same.
No,
it's not the same relationships.
No.
Women are so much better at explaining and powering down on those relationships and making us really think about, where we're coming from and where we're going and what we're doing. Sports analogies and war analogies in business, I think, are really outdated.
Yeah, they don't work for me anyway.
They never work.
So
for me.
on the back of that stat, I went searching where can you find women speakers, because I wanted to say to the women in the group, this is where you go and sign up. There's nothing out there.
I know.
I really was shocked. So I went on the internet, nothing. I mean, there is Saxton's and ICMI and all the big agencies have a percentage of women. But if you have a budget that's maybe $2,500 or less, you can't go to the big guys. So there was a combination of seeing a post where someone from a big company said, I'm fed up using Saxton's and ICMI, where can I find some other talent? And a woman in a women's group that said, where can I find some women to talk for my little business group? I'm looking for one a month. And I suddenly thought, I might as well just set up a group. So on LinkedIn, I set up a group, invited 30 women, created a logo in 5 minutes on my phone in Canva and posted it up. And that was 6 weeks ago. And there's now 640 women on LinkedIn. I then thought, I better do it on Facebook, because there are some women that aren't on LinkedIn that are on Facebook. That's at 600 too. So I feel like that's something else that I'll probably focus on a bit this year. And then to just go through the 7 pillars, the next one is awards. Another stat for you, 3% of women win awards, which is just, again, rubbish. And something that in my little microcosm, I'm surrounded by women winning awards all the time. I thought that women were winning at least 50% of the awards.
One would think.
And I know that Annette Densham and Karen Hall from Reputation by Design and Audacious Agency who focus on helping women win awards, which I think is brilliant. So that's another important part, because that gives you the integrity to show that it is what what you're talking about.
Yep.
And then last but not least, I tacked on online courses, because the way I use an online course is to build trust, to get the basic information that I want to talk about out there, so that when people start working with me, I don't have to explain what PR is or what I mean by an influence. And I don't mean Instagram. Yeah. I mean, having real influence. And I guess my message to women is, if you make yourself influential, if you give yourself more power in the world, you can get more things changed and done. Yes. So, I mean, as much as you might want to change the world and do great things, if nobody knows who you are and nobody knows what you're doing, then you might as well not be doing it. So for me, it's really important that women start to make themselves more visible and kind of raise their profile. So yeah, that's where Women of Influence came from, and that's what I'm doing.
Excellent. And I love the idea. I think it's so fantastic. And I think I've spoken to a couple of women that you've worked with from the Women of Influence.
Have you?
And
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. and they're really getting something really solid out of it. And I noticed that they're changing their business stories, and I've watched a couple of businesses of people that I knew who then did the Women of Influence, and I've watched their businesses really up level.
Oh, great.
And it's been really interesting. I'm not going to mention names to you, because they'll get their own little spot in the sun, I'm sure, at some point. But yeah, it's just been a really interesting observation of how people can go through something.
Well, I tell you, one of the things that I learned, and if there's anything you'd say about me, is if I have an idea, I just do it. I just make it happen. With the Women of Influence, I just created it. What I've discovered is taking people through a 7-week course where I touch on those subjects for an hour a week is nowhere near enough. So it's been really interesting, but it's going to be my foundation course. And then I'm going to offer one-on-one mentoring, I think, to help people with specific parts of the project.
And that people need someone like you in their lives that have seen, and particularly your experience in PR and advertising and media, and also obviously your social proof, the way that you've actually brought these groups together, and over a really, really short period of time, you've become such a woman of influence yourself, particularly on LinkedIn, I want to say. I don't think that there's a woman in Australia that I could mention your name to that wouldn't know you already.
Oh my God.
Or know of you.
Thank you.
It's the way
this
that
is now
you've done
embarrassing.
This.
Stop
I'm sorry, I'll stop. No, I won't stop. You've got to stand in your power, Jules.
You do. You actually have to
stand in your power and be really happy.
Thank you very much.
Because also it's true. Thanks so much for listening. It's been great to see you or have you here again. We've got our disclaimer. None of the information that we're giving is in any way related to your personal circumstances, and it's for education purposes only. Can't wait to see you in part 2 of our interview with Jules Brooke. So hang on for the next part of this amazing woman and her amazing story.